Hello. So, this is a presentation about Go, the oldest board game in the world. I made some Go presentations in the past. This one I prepared a year ago for an audience that never heard anything about Go, but knew about chess and liked it a lot, and they were curious about my experience of Go. So in the past I made presentations about the more details of Go, its own history, and really focusing on the game, but I realized for that audience I was clear that they would be comparing it a lot to chess in their heads, while not really, probably as most people in the West, understanding the history of chess themselves. So I realized to really hammer home the point of Go and how it fits into the complexity of the board games in the world, I thought I should probably go at it from a much more broader point. So this presentation talks about Go actually just briefly and focuses more on chess and the other old games and how Go fits into that. But I thought it was quite okay in the end, so I thought let's put it on tape, and this is it. The aim is not to argue that one is better or the other. This is not some sales pitch for Go, but it's really to explain that a lot of what some people think about chess actually applies more to Go. Things like it being very old, very traditional, and yeah. So to present the development of board games in history, and highlight the uniqueness of Go. These are the points. So I'm gonna go through the old games. Chess, because that's what everybody knows. Backgammon, because that's like the other archetype of old games. Some old European games, just because a friend of mine pointed out that it's not good to totally skip it, although it's not that. It's not such a big player in the grand scheme of things, and of course Go. And then compare these old archetypical approaches to expressing reality on a board. And some small points like the material that's used for the game, the rating system, AI, which was like a new emerging thing, although nowadays everybody and their grandmother know about AI, so it's almost like a mute point, but I can just make some small points about it. The rules and some tips. The tips, okay, that's gonna be skipped here because there's no live audience here to have some Q&A. And rules, I figured I'm gonna show them immediately because that's just a question of like 2 minutes, and if somebody never saw Go in their whole life, it's good to just see how it looks before going through all of this. So let me switch to the browser, and so this is OGS, online Go server. I recommend it for anybody looking for if you want to start playing online, although if you never heard about the game before, you should maybe go through the learn to play Go by yourself, or even after you learn the basic rules, which I'm gonna go over quickly now. Just get prepared that the first maybe 25 to even 50 games you're all gonna lose. It's gonna take a little while to understand what the frick is actually happening on such a board, and I just recommend to play against the computer on a tiny board like this on 9x9. But for now, let me just pick out just a quick somebody that usually plays on a 13x13, just anything, just so that I can have a clear board, you know. And so in Go, black starts. You play on intersections. You can play on any intersection anytime you want. White does the same. Now, every stone has some amount of, we call it liberties. It's the orthogonal closest intersections. A stone on the edge has 3, a stone in the middle has 4, and a stone in the corner has 2. I think like that's the basic thing to understand. Most of the first basic tsumegos, they call it tsumego, it's like some puzzles, yeah. So the first of like puzzles to check your knowledge is basically just about being able to count the liberties, right? So once more, a simple stone in the middle has 4, one on the side has 3, one in the corner has 2, obviously. So, but now what happens if another stone of the same color is put on one of those liberties? The stones connect into a group, and this group is now sharing each other's liberties. So these 2 stones now have 6 liberties. On the other hand, if a stone of another color would touch that liberty, they get not connected but subtracted. So this stone has only 3, this stone also has only 3. The black stone now has only 2. Now the black stone has only 1 last liberty, and if white would put a stone on the last liberty, okay, I guess it needs to be played. The stone would disappear because every stone that's on the board needs to have at least 1 liberty. I think that's all. That's all from the basic view. Everything else in the game is like stems from that. I think that's enough, really. Like I'm really tempted to talk more about other implications, but really every stone is the same. It can be placed anywhere. It has to have at least 1 liberty to be legally placed on the board, and the same color on the liberty, they get connected. A different stone, they get subtracted. That's all. That's the whole game, and the point of the game, the goal, is to surround as much territory as possible, which I understand is not really a clear description. Like, how do you surround territory? That's something that you would have to figure out for yourself as you start playing the game. But let's go back to the presentation. So if you just wanted to know the basic rules, this is it. But now we're going through like the basically the world history of board games. So we start with chess because that's what everybody knows. How did chess start? So it was around the 6th century in India. It was played on the same size board as it's now. The name Chaturanga comes from the four arms, like in the quotes. Like obviously, I have no idea about Hindi, but they call it the four arms that are of the army that are mentioned in the Mahabharata. So it's the infantry, cavalry, elephantry, and chariotry, and the game had two different versions in the beginning. There was a version for 2 and a version for 4 players. It's not totally clear which one is the older one, but they shared the same type of pieces. So this is the version for the 2 players. Just to explain a little bit of the movements. An elephant, nobody knows what an elephant is in modern chess, but so it's one of the most iconic and old typical pieces in traditional, let's say, old traditional chess. And it's moving by 2 diagonally. If there's a piece close from it, like it can jump over it just like a knight. A minister was like the old version of a queen, you can imagine. So there was just one minister, and it was moving just one diagonally. So just like a helper to the king, but much weaker. And chariot is basically just a different skin of the rook, of the modern rook. So this is how it looked. This is actually a picture from Osaka, if I'm not mistaken, one of the best old, like, surviving collections. Note that it's also 3D carved pieces, just like in the modern days. Also, the setup is basically the same as in the modern times, and in general, like, this game is already extremely similar to modern chess, but between here and what we got in modern chess in the modern times, like, there were still a lot of steps and a lot of different versions and branches branching out into different countries, and we're gonna go through all of it. These are basically the pieces: the king, the helper, elephant, knight, chariotry, and pawn. The version for 4 players looked like this, and one interesting thing is that the chariotry was, I said that it had the same pieces, which is kind of true, but here it was not a chariot. Here it was a ship. So that's a weird historical thing. I can't really explain it. It's still not totally clear which is the older one, but the movement was flipped. So the ship moved. If I like, there were some exceptions, but the short version is that it basically moved like the elephant, and the elephant moved like the chariot. So the elephant in the 4-player version moves like a rook, but the boat moves basically like an elephant. No idea why, but this is how we think it was. One interesting thing to note about Chaturanga is that the pawns also is in modern chess upgrade on the last line, but in modern chess you can choose whatever piece you want, right? Usually everybody chooses a queen, but in traditional Chaturanga you are forced to choose. Well, it's not a choice, right? You're forced to upgrade to the piece behind which you stand. So that's definitely an interesting rule. It kind of makes you feel like the pawns have some inherent potential in them, right? So, and I kind of like that rule. And uncertain which is older. So that's Chaturanga. Another picture where the shape of the boat is quite obvious. After that is Xiangqi. So that's Chinese chess. We think it's probably around 6th to definitely by the 9th century, definitely. The oldest mentions of something that's probably a real game is in the 6th century. First real description, so the 8th and 9th century. Although there are claims that describe it to be much older. There are some drawings that look like there's a game that look like a game in the sky. So actually a lot of old board games are compared to star constellations. So what I'm trying to say is that this is nothing unusual, and it's basically just an attempt to claim that it's much older than it probably is, that it could predate the Indian chess. But as far as I can tell, the oldest type of chess is really Chaturanga, and it quickly spread through the world. And was basically just the Chinese version, where in China they already had Go before, and as they adapted chess, or Chaturanga, they made it into their own version where certain elements from Go blended into it. Let me show you how it looks like, so that you can have an image in your head. So it's also played on intersections, just like Go. The board is a little bigger, and it's not black and white, it's black and red. So what's different is the space in the middle. They call it a river, and pawns upgrade right after crossing the river. Also, the pawns don't capture diagonally. This is actually something that I was surprised to find out when studying about Chaturanga. I always, for many years, thought that capturing diagonally is such a weird, unusual move. Like, it doesn't really sound like very natural, right? Normally you would think that you would capture where you go, which is how the Chinese play it. But surprisingly, the diagonal capture from the pawns, it comes from all the way in Chaturanga. So there are obviously, it probably has their own reasons, right? Like, I can't tell you 100%, but one possible answer could be in the 4-player version. This is the king. I think it would be easier to capture the king if this could just capture going straight. But I mean, these are just thoughts. I have no real idea why they didn't allow pawns to capture going forward, that you have to capture diagonally. I'm not even sure which would be stronger, but in the Chinese version, you just capture where you go. They have a space called the palace, which is the space around the king. It's just this 3x3 space where the king is basically, you could call it, trapped together with his helpers. And there's a interesting piece called the cannon, which moves like a rook, but in order to capture something, you have to first jump over another piece. I'm not going to go into the details of examples. Like if you're interested, like learning Xiangqi is definitely there are a lot of resources around this, and it's actually very, very popular. I think, counting on pure head count, I think Xiangqi could be the most played board game in the world, actually, just because it has so many players in China. So I didn't look up the numbers, but I think this is not a surprising claim that if you put somebody in front of a Go game or a chess game and you don't know anything, picking up, I think it's easy to get interested in chess because it's much more like humanly relatable, right? Like you see pieces, they move somehow. There is like look, this is an animal. It has some. It jumps in certain shapes. Oh, it's really like a game, like a gamey game. I don't know if I'm putting my point across well, but I hope you understand me, right? You can personalize. What's the right word? You can strangely identify with the specific pieces, right? So let's not dwell on this for too long. Slight differences. Yeah, the king is weaker, so it doesn't move in all directions. It moves by one, but not in all directions, just horizontally and vertically, so orthogonally. The elephant can't jump over something, right? So the movement is basically the same, only that in Chinese chess you can stop the elephant to move in a direction if you stand immediately in front of him. This is actually something that blended into Go as well, because in Chinese chess they call it to poke out the eye of an elephant, to stand in front of it, and it's a saying that is used in Go as well for a similar shape. The knight can't jump over. Yeah, so at least that's consistent, right? The elephant can't jump over pieces. The knight also can't jump over pieces. So there is a specific path that the L is drawn in, and the path has to be clear, basically. Pawns take only where they can move. Yeah, I already mentioned that. This is how it looks. This is a version with some pictures, which is a little bit more relatable to Westerners, right? In Chinese and Japanese chess, they got used to using more like to express it with signs. I think it's quite. I think it looks quite lovely. It's interesting also that the theme that I noticed also in Korean chess, the board with the old guys playing in parks tends to be quite simple or often very rough, but the The pieces are often surprisingly well made, and in Chinese chess you can especially see they're quite large. I think like I saw people play with Korean chess as well. What I'm trying to say, I have a feeling that that Chinese chess has the largest chess pieces. I can't back that up. It's just a feeling that I get from pictures. So after China, on this branch, if we go to the east, of course, after that we will mention how chess moved to the west. But right now we're looking at how chess got created in India, moved to China, and then later, actually much later, moved through Korea to Japan, where in Japan in the 11th century they started experimenting with their own version of chess. So this is obviously much later. I'm not 100% sure why in China they suddenly felt like playing into the fields again, like in the traditional chaturanga, but it's an interesting evolution. The board is still 9x9, but they play into the fields. And the game went through a lot of versions and a lot of experiments throughout all of these centuries. So between the 13th and 17th century, there were a lot of experiments, right until the Tokugawa era, actually. Many different board sizes, all of these that you can see here, 11, 12, 15, like all the way up to 36. Some of them were more common, some of them were more rare. There were different versions at the time, and they were commonly played until the 20th century. So the modern version of shogi got like well, I'll get to it later, but it's pretty new to be considered the default shogi. Up until the 20th century, other versions were still very common, and I'm gonna mention now 3 big versions. So it's the big, middle, and small version: Dai, Chu, and Shou. Dai means big, so that was the biggest board, and that was one of the. It's interesting that when they said, okay, let's make our own shogi, our own chess, they started with, okay, let's make it as big as possible. And as the centuries went, the board and the trend also, let's say, had the board shrunk more and more. So shogi dai, or like dai shogi, was a 15 by 15 board. It had 65 pieces and a lot of movements. The promotion of pawns in shogi is always on the last third. So on a 15 by 15, the pawns get promoted on the last 5 rows. And it introduced a huge amount of, like, I say introduced, but they really made up a huge amount of, like, they were very creative, and I highly recommend anybody interested in this to look up. Let me quickly open just to showcase this. Like, I think if I search Chu shogi, I'll get the quickest So this is Chu, this is the middle one, but I just was on this just recently, so I know that I can easily show you these diagrams that show how the different pieces were moving, right? Incredibly interesting. And it was not about, I think I misspoke a moment ago if I said the pawns promoting. Close to almost every single piece in shogi can get a promotion, especially in these old versions especially. So incredibly interesting. They had a piece called a lion, which basically moves like a modern king, but it can move 2 times in a row. So you can take 2 different pieces. If 2 pieces stand behind each other, you can take them both, or you can take one and go back to where you were, which is a special move that had a special name. It means like taking without moving. Incredibly interesting. Anybody interested in like making their own new version of some chess game, look at all of those old shogi pieces, how they moved, because I think a lot of inspiration can be drawn from here. Back to the presentation. So, an interesting point, a phoenix, I think we saw it on the picture, just on the diagram just before. It was written queen, but the actual name was called fast king. And because daishogi comes from 1230 and the modern chess was not really invented back then yet, you could claim that the Japanese made the modern queen movement, which is kind of like a joke, because I doubt that the Japanese chess inspired Vienna. Was it Vienna? No, like modern chess when it got created in Spain. We'll get to it later. Obviously they didn't steal some thoughts from the Japanese, but it is interesting that this movement is that old actually, and it got created by the Japanese just as a coincidence, because they were experimenting with that many different moves. Let's move along. So, and a drunk elephant, yeah, also interesting point. So you could have 2 kings, and the way how you get a second is, when I say 2 kings, on your side of the board you have your own king, and you can get another king by promoting something called a drunk elephant. So the kanjis are written with elephant and sake, but I mean, I'm not 100% sure what the idea behind that is. Like, why is it called like some sake elephant or a drunk elephant? I'm not really sure where it comes from, but it's certainly interesting that it depicts something like something big, fat, and drunk, that if it's successful it becomes a prince, basically like a second king. So I mean, I don't know, but if they were trying to be funny, they succeeded. This is how the 15 by 15 version looks like. So it's mayhem, right? It's crazy. And also you have to understand, close to every single one of these flips to the other side, right? That's what's called the promotion, like under the bottom side of every piece, or I don't know if every, but of most pieces, you have the other movement type that it gets promoted to when it crosses to the last 5 lines. Crazy, totally crazy. I read that a big part of this game was almost just remembering how everything moves. So that's one of the reasons probably why it wasn't that popular. Chushogi, the middle shogi size, was much more popular already. So that was 12 by 12 from the 14th century, 46 pieces, already much more manageable. Again, promotion in the last third, in this case the last 4 rows. It looks something like this. I think here I have another picture of the 12 by 12, so with pictures. So this is the best representation with like pictures that I could find. I mean, it's incredibly interesting. I don't have really the motivation to try to remember all of this and find out where I could theoretically play something like this. But up until recently, this version was still commonly played in Japan. I think it's still played, it's just not very common. And then show means small, so the small version on the 9 by 9th. Starting in the 15th century. Already this was extremely similar to the modern version. There's just a small difference that I'll get to soon. So 21 pieces. In this version there's, okay, if I simplify it a lot, there's just 1 bishop, 1 rook, and the promotion is in the last 3 rows. And finishing the Japanese chess, the modern shogi version comes from the 16th century, and it's a very direct descendant from the small shogi. The big difference that got introduced here, probably under historical, like let's say cultural reasons, I've written here a 15th century practice of mercenaries to change sides after being captured in a war. So it's quite possible that this influenced the rule that got added, or it got added, like it was like a version of the game, right, where you could reuse captured pieces. But the problem is that if there was still this piece of the drunk elephant, so you could capture another elephant, and you could have, in that case, like up to 3 kings, right? So you would have your own elephant, then the other person's elephant, and your king, and your and you can capture them again, like the other side can capture any of your 2 elephants again and reuse them. Like this type of game becomes very quickly very like I mean obnoxious, like I'm not sure what's the right word, but you can understand that this was definitely not great. So the drunk elephant just got removed from this version, and bang, you have modern shogi. So this modern version is basically just shogi without the drunk elephant, plus the possibility to reuse captured pieces. So obviously this rule of using captured pieces was more popular than the drunk elephant. So this one prevailed. Prolonging the game, not suitable for figure. Yeah, exactly, which I said. So this is the modern version with like a modern, I mean, I'm saying modern, but it's quite traditional, but this type of table with this type of mini table next to it. It's used to put your captured pieces on so that they're ready to be reused. And interesting point is that it's built on three rows, right? So as you could guess, the first one are the pawns, and these two, it's the rook and the bishop. You could, if I use the Western names for it, and the baseline is like what you could imagine. This is lands, the knight, the silver and the gold general and the king, and it's the same, like silver and gold general. The drunk elephant in the show version was right in front of the king, exactly here. So without him, the row is quite empty, but, well, I can easily see that there almost like belongs a piece, but they didn't want to. They literally just took it out. Yeah. And here is a version with pictures. So I'm not sure who made the one on the top, but it's quite nicely visible from it where the things can move. So the silver and gold general, the parts of the picture, they point into direction where they can move. I think it's actually visible here as well. And this version is actually made in Czech Republic from Shogi CZ, I noticed. I think this is also quite well made, showing to the Western players that can't easily read the signs or remember the movements that shows them where the things move. I tried playing it a few times, and I was shocked how difficult it is to play with totally different movements. I'm not very good at chess, but I was absolutely horrible with this thing. Like, I couldn't do basic things. So it's interesting, but I encourage everybody to try. So here we're almost done with this move, where chess moved from India to the east. Obviously, chess also moved from India to the west. And as you saw how similar the modern chess is to Chaturanga, it didn't make that drastic changes, but let's see what happened. So in the 7th century, it went through Persia, and Chaturanga in Persian was called Chatrang, or how it's pronounced, Chatrang, and under Arabic influence became Shatranj. I guess that was just right how maybe under Arabic how you pronounce different things. So I guess it just changed into Shat, and because Sheikh, their let's say king, right, is called a Sheikh. When the king dies, they were calling it Sheikh mate. I have no idea how the proper Arabic reading is, but everybody knows Shachmat, right? Like or checkmate in English, right? Checkmate. So this is where it comes from. In German, you call it also Schachmat, which in my language, in Czech, you call it exactly the same. So this is interesting, but this is where it comes from. It comes basically from Sheikh, which is somehow similar to Shatrang, coming from Chaturanga. And in the 8th century, got to Spain through basically in between the 8th and 15th century, the Muslims kind of ruled over Spain, and this is how chess got to Spain, and through Spain to Europe. So in the 9th century, it got to Europe, and through Arabian merchants also to Russia. By the 11th century, the whole of Europe already knew about chess, but but don't forget, this is basically the Arabic version of chess. And when I say version, like, I don't think they changed much. This is just about like how pieces were carved, but I think the rules were basically the same as in the classic Chaturanga for 2 players. As far as I know, the version for 4 players, if it moved out, I'm not sure if it was popular in other countries. The whole time here I'm talking about just the 2-player version. 15th century modern European chess. Yeah, so when I said Venezia, I meant Valencia. Yeah. So when Spain got, let's say, liberated in 1475 in Valencia specifically, this is what I found, that the birthing year of the modern version of European chess. The closest countries it got to was France and Italy, and then later the rest of Europe. And like, almost not necessary to explain, but the obvious differences is that the queen and the bishop came to the game. I think it's quite I don't know if to say obvious, but they took out the elephant for the bishop, probably because an elephant is not really a European animal and the bishop is very Christian. So if they were really focused on taking out all the foreign elements and putting in as many Western elements as possible, like, I guess it seems like that's what was happening. So they kicked out the elephant, they put in the bishop, which was much more powerful but had a similar movement, right? It also moved diagonally, but not strictly by 2, but infinitely. And the queen, which moved this was obviously a crazy upgrade. So instead of just to move just diagonally by 1, they put in a queen which moved like a king infinitely. And but interesting, like, female power, yay, in the 15th century. This was definitely an interesting choice. And castling, no idea why that was introduced, and pawns moving by 2 on their first move, I guess to speed up the game or whatever. And obviously en passant comes from this introduction later as well. The rook reskinned from chariot to a castle tower. Yeah, so again, obviously, a chariot was a very typical Arabian battle, like war instrument. So they just reskinned it to something more European, I guess. I mean, this is lovely. Like, one of the reasons why I talk about these details is to really point out how the times and the cultural circumstances always had a really strong impact on how the game evolved. It's actually quite incredible that we have this game for like 500 years and we didn't introduce any more big changes. Like, I'm all for making some new modern version, like I guess if Christianity is or like spirituality is dying, like, we can switch the bishop again for something else, I guess, or we can do whatever, right? So I'm totally in favor of experimenting with the modern chess versions, because, like, just look at the Japanese, what they did, right? Like, it's quite incredible how long we stayed on this version. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying this game is made by humans, right? And a group of a few friends in the room can in a few minutes come up with a totally new chess rule set that could be very fun as well. Outside of Europe, so some interesting mentions. In the 14th century, Thai chess was created. So it's more similar to, again, like to this Western version. So it's called makruk. The ruk comes from the word ruk, for which means chariot. So it's from this version. It's also interesting. I don't know if anybody ever thought where the ruk comes from, right? But yeah, it's Persian for chariot. And even though they took this piece as their most iconic piece, just like the Chinese took the elephant and called and called their version basically after the elephant. Let me get this back. Xiang Jie Xiang. So Xiang means elephant, and so they basically called it elephant game. Yeah, I have it mentioned here. The Thai took the rook, called it makruk. This is how it looks like. Also interesting, similar. I think they took a lot of inspiration from the Japanese version. They also have it on 3 lines, but here the second line is empty, and they switched the elephant for what they call like a nobleman, I guess it's translated, and it has the exact same movement as a silver general from shogi. So they totally just flipped, just like changed one piece for another. It's a little bit interesting because if you know anything about Thailand, I was there just this year for the first time, and they really love their elephants. It's like the national animal, you could say. And so I'm quite surprised that in the 14th century the elephant was the one that they thought needs to be changed for another one. It's interesting. But I also have to say that the movement speed of the traditional elephant is really, really, like, I don't know if the word stupid is right, but it can move to only a few spaces on the whole board, right? If you think that you have to go 2 diagonally and nothing else, just by 2, not 3, not 1, only 2. So you can go only there and back, or it's not many spaces that you can occupy on a board. So that could be the reason. Maybe they like elephant, but they just didn't like the movement. I guess that would make sense. Although that was not a deal breaker for the Chinese. Anyway, pawns start 1 line higher. Yeah, on the 3rd line, which, as I said, could be inspired by shogi. And 16th century Jangi, the Korean chess. This one is extremely similar to the Chinese version, just a little bit more simplified. Like they don't have this is it. They don't have the river thing in the middle, and I mean it's not having the river is just a graphical thing, right? But the rules are basically the same. The only major, well, it's not even major difference, but the placement of the king is 1 space moved. And an interesting detail, the pieces have the cut, the like most typical picture of those, like how the pieces are cut is that their corners are cut. The most typical way how the Chinese stones are made is round, and the Korean ones are cut. yeah. So I saw this I spent half a year in South Korea, totally loved it, and saw a picture like this many times in parks. The chess is really, I would say, again, I thought that Go would be like the number one game there, but chess is really popular among people in the world. So I have nothing against chess. It's a really lovely game, and it can connect people in this way. Although, as you can see, many countries make their own versions, and yeah, it's interesting. I love this guy, how he holds his cup and how shocked he is by this move. And again, notice how horrible the table is, but again, the pieces look nicer than the table. Anyway, so that's all for chess for now. Backgammon. So this part of the presentation is about luck-based games. The way how you generate luck is with the simplest way is with dice. The oldest boards with dice are found around 3000 BC. 4000 years ago, that's the point where also the oldest findings of Go are found. Basically nothing, no kind of board games exist before that. The only thing that's older than 4000 years are like a ancient version of bowling, where you just have like a string and a ball and some pins. So that I found is something that existed, but around 4000 years ago we have already the first board games, and in the Persian area we found dice and dice-based games. From versions of that, versions of already the oldest ones are resembling something like Backgammon, where, I mean, the idea is quite simple, that the die just tells you how many spaces you move something, so that's how you basically connect a die-based game with a board. 2600 BC, the royal game of so that's a pretty famous, probably the oldest surviving board layout. It looks like this. Interesting thing is that the dice were four-sided. When I first realized this, it actually I totally realized that, yeah, that makes totally sense. Like, to make a die with four sides, it's probably the absolute easiest way how to carve that out, right? And you don't look at like the side with a number. You just literally look at the how to call it, like, not edge, but you literally call which point points up, right? And that's the thing that got thrown. So that's interesting. In Egypt, the oldest ones, we have Senet around 1600 BC. That we can't, of course, not know for sure how all these games, what exact rules and what exact layouts they were, but this is how a modern version, or modern, like a recreation of Senet looks like. And yeah, through Persia, Arabia, dice-based games got to Europe, and the oldest ones, which was a backgammon-like board we know about in Greece, was around the 5th century. Then around the 11th and 12th century, it got to France and Germany. Obviously, games with luck-based games are prone to be used for gambling. but obviously you can gamble with anything, right? That you can gamble with, I mean, it depends on your definition of the word gambling, but you can bet money on anything, right? And it's common to bet on even Go games in Asia, but obviously when you have a luck aspect, it hands itself well to luck-based games or games that have a aspect of luck. 13th to 16th century, the church forbade gambling games, but in general it's quite interesting. I have this note here that in 1526 in England, under Henry VIII, there was a cardinal that literally ordered the burning of all board games. Not like dice, cards, but all board games. Just because the church didn't like gambling, and they declared all board games illegal, which is incredible. And obviously a rule like that can't survive for a long time, right? Every time when governments try to outlaw something that is quite simple and in demand, and you can go around relatively easily, it can't survive for too long, right? But it's always interesting to witness that. In this case, it took like maybe 100 or a few hundred years between that, and in the 18th century it was already a popular game even among the church. The interesting thing is that because of that period, this trend of having boards as part of, for example, furniture or in other ways hidden, got created, and that's really lovely, because until even today there are, for example, Go boards created that look like turtle, where when you take off the shell under it you have the board, and a lot of interesting things like that stem from this period. Well, obviously, like having boards as part of furniture is not thanks only to this period, but thanks to this period it was quite common. And looked, this is like an example, for example, right, where you have just a normal table, and you just take off the desk, and under it, bang, you have a totally illegal backgammon board, right? Like how funny is it, right? You just take like a few dice, paint a few strings, and bang, you have something that's illegal. Lovely. A thing that's incredibly interesting about backgammon is that this very simple layout that's probably thousands of years old, like the basic idea of it, right, survived to such a similar way until today, right? So this is obviously a picture from like a store from today. This is from the 17th century, and the board looks like identical, and I find these things really interesting. There are many paintings from that period showing similar situations like this, where games are something that connects people, obviously, especially in days where you don't have like television or other forms of simple mass entertainment, right? So people spend more time together in these common settings like pubs and stuff, and the obvious thing here is that like a simple person is playing with like some noble guy, and using a game that uses luck for that is very typical, right? You've got some tobacco or other substance or whatever, and people are drunk, and things get heated. Like, it's really interesting, and there are many pieces of art that depict these kind of situations. Board games in Europe. So not many survived until today, like in an active way, like chess did. But there are some notable mentions. In Greece in the 7th century, there are many findings that look like this, where you just have some 5 lines or some amount of lines. It was called literally like the 5 lines game, and obviously the rules are unclear because the findings are very sparse, and but other games got derived from that. So first, 7th century BC, of course, and in the 1st century BC we have La Tranquilli, which a friend of mine actually asked me about. I didn't know about it before, so there's still some modern rules of La Tranquilli. It's quite interesting. In certain ways it's slightly similar to Go, but you have moving pieces, so this depiction could be from the like 5 lines. Obviously here we see 5 lines, and this is like a version of like modern La Tranquilli, but it can be played on different board sizes. The way in which it's played, these modern rules, is that if you get a stone surrounded on 2 sides by another color, the stone gets taken off. So and also there is like 2 types. You have like the common type and the like general, or how you would call it, type. The important thing to note here is that the pieces are moving, so that's a definitely a big difference to Go. In this way it's similar to chess, but the pieces are relatively, if we discount like the 1 piece that's like extra, the stones are all the same, you could say. And through Europe, this probably influenced a game in Scandinavia called Hnetafl. I call it here Viking chess, but depends how you translate it. Viking chess can look like this. It obviously has nothing to do with chess. It's more similar to this Roman and Greece ancestor, where the rule is, as far as I know, basically the same. Where if you surround a piece with another colors on 2 sides, it gets taken off the board. It has different, as far as I know, this rule, or like this board that we're looking at right now, you have like the king in the middle, and the goal of the game is to get it to the edge of the board. But there are different versions of this game as well, so you could play it in a similar way like this, I guess. I mean, anytime, obviously, like let's be honest, anytime something is older than like 1,000 years or even more, it's hard to know the exact details how it was played in everyday life, right? And we get to Go. So Go, it's said, most writings usually say 4,000-year-old game. The findings are obviously, it's always difficult to say, is this a Go board or is this just some piece with carved lines? But some of the oldest legends of Chinese rulers who created Go for their sons. So those are like the legends how it got created, right? Another popular Chinese legend is, I say Chinese, it was the area of today's China, but obviously like 4,000 years ago. Another legend is that 2 wise men were playing in the woods, and a farmer found them, looked at them playing, and he felt like time is flying by, and by the time he realized the game is over and went back to his village, several generations have passed. So, which shows something about how it's trying to say how captivating the game can be, right? And that the origin is maybe a little bit like mystical, right? He saw some gods or somebody that's beyond time playing, right? So yeah, but actually it goes to a deeper point that I want to go back to later, that Go can be really considered as something more outside of the creation of simple humans because of its simplicity and depth, but I'm gonna get to it later. The 6th century BC is the oldest mention, like the definite mention by Confucius, that's how you pronounce it. 3rd century mentions of famous Go players. 1st century, the oldest preserved book about Go. That's pretty cool. The oldest preserved match, the 1st century again. 7th century, Go gets to Japan, and at first is played just by the aristocracy, which is quite a typical thing usually, right? In the old days, it takes a while before something like that gets to gets to normal people. I have quite a big gap here. I don't want to have this present. Like, you could have several hour long presentation about just the history of Go, right? But I just want to give like some big points. The golden era of Go was where the 4 famous families got established and influenced like titles that persist until today, and legendary games, and that was in the Tokugawa shogunate, call it Edo, with the major restoration in 1868. I mean, the period it does, and the government actually sponsored professional Go, so that's one of the main reasons it flourished that much, because it was professional. You were paid for playing it, right? And the families had actually quite a big influence in like even the political sphere, but I'm not gonna get into it that much right now. 1880, Germany, first article about Go in the West. Yep, interesting. This is how Go looks like. We looked at it in the beginning, and here we have some old paintings, Japanese paintings. So these are usually huge 3-piece paintings, which are like basically wall paintings. In many of them you see like some person, some fighter throwing the board. Obviously the board, the goban, is like a highly respected piece of it's a highly respected piece in a room, right? So you even shouldn't put anything else than stones on it, or like maybe the goke, the things that hold the stones, but you never would put anything else on it, like obviously not any cups, it's obvious, or even other things. You shouldn't leave it. And using it in such a drastic manner actually again gives like a deeper meaning about like the significance of the situation. So that's it, depicted in many ways. There are many paintings showing that. and to get to the like almost like a conclusion of this whole point, why I was talking so much about chess and backgammon and Go, and well, especially chess, because right, I already explained, to hammer home the point to people that know only chess, to explain to them the history of it, and that chess is not just like one thing that's played around the world, but how the situation actually is. It's good to look back at this history and these types of games and realize what the things on the board actually represent, right? The player, what's the player, who is the player in that game, right? If you play cards, like traditional cards, it's just you and the other player, right? Like there are no other entities. If you have a board, the thing changes a little bit, because when you have a game like chess, you could say that you're like the king almost, like that you're almost like a part of the board, because if the king dies, the game ends, which almost personalizes you into the entity of the king on the board. But I mean, you could even be considered like a general that commands the entities on the board, and the element of chance. So, as I explained a moment ago, chance, luck is used a lot for gambling. Even before it gets used for games, the obvious other, even older purpose is like divination, right? Because what is actually this element of chance? You could call it on the board. It's literally another call it entity. I don't know. It's another. It's almost like another player, right? Like it's you, the other player, and then chance. And what's that chance, right? It can be fate, God, or something else that's abstract, but that's definitely with you in the room, that you like pray to for luck, right? And that's definitely interesting to realize that all of these things go into what makes the final game, and what people choose for different settings, right? You can play chess in a bar, but in a bar where you drink and you become slowly drunk, it's obviously hands itself to have a game that is slightly more luck-based, right? Because it just files away the sharpness of the influence of the individual players. Grouping games by types. So I tried to put these three things into like a graph, to have chance on the y-axis, where you have chess and Go, and like for example checkers, mill, 5 in a row, games that don't require chance, and games that do require chance, like backgammon, cards, and basically any type of modern game. And on the x-axis, to have the abstractness of the game. So I didn't mention that before. Obviously, things where you have literally like a king and a queen and like a person, right? It abstracts society. Well, I'm using the word abstract, but it's trying to depict something like a society, right? It definitely is trying to be similar to something. So even the Latrancoli, where the pieces move, even though they don't look like a real thing, just by effect of moving, it kind of makes you feel like the board is like a real world space in which you move, right? You don't really have a feeling like that in Go, where the pieces don't move, where it just accumulates. You don't really feel like there is like entity that's trying to get from one place to another. It's more like it's more abstract. So I'm just basically saying what's the difference between it being more tangible, like a social thing, and a more abstract thing where it doesn't remind you of anything exact, right? So this is definitely one way how to differentiate Go from chess, backgammon, or other modern games, like the mix between the mix of a game that has a social aspect plus chance. That can be like any kind of modern RPG, right? You could almost say that chess is like a old RPG game without chance, basically, right? So this is one way how to show how Go is different to these other games. It's the absence of chance, which is not that difficult to do, but it's also the absence of being similar to anything else in society, right? It's very clean regarding cultural influences. Like checkers or male or five in a row also feels similar in that way, right? Like there is no element of in the 15th century or in the 9th century we wanted to get rid of the elephant to put in a queen and the bishop because we really wanted to push forward Christianity or whatever, right? Or like the mercenary situation in Japan of that time when modern shogi was got that influence, right? And just because that got popular, this type of chess became the popular one, but it could have been anything else. These types of games that are abstract and without chance are very clean in this way. So Go is among them, but it's not the only thing that makes Go special. The other thing that gets connected with it is that it has something that I call here spontaneous complexity. Spontaneous complexity is something that you get when you have simple and recursive rules. So what I mean with recursive is that all the rules of the game are within just the one stone. There is no, and this is different to, for example, five in a row, or checkers. That's a little bit debatable, but definitely male five in a row. That takes in account the situation on a board, right? Like a number of stones, they have to be together in some constellation in order to create something. And that's the rule, you know? Like obviously shapes play a role in Go, but it's not the rule. There's no rule that you have to put 5 things in a row. The only rule is about what happens to a stone when other stones that have the same rules like it, what happens in such a situation, right? So you describe only what happens to a single stone, and then that just accumulates when you put more stones next to each other. To show a little bit more what I mean with that, I'm mentioning the Conway's Game of Life here, so don't get too confused about the word game here. This is literally just a computer algorithm, but that's very simple, but it describes what happens to individual cells on a grid based on other cells in the grid. So again, just like in Go, the only rule here is, or what I'm trying to say is that the algorithm applies only to the one cell, and it applies to all cells in the same way. So if you never heard about this algorithm, you literally just take a grid, you paint a number, you paint anything in, and then you progress the generation. You say, hey, let's find out what happens in the next step. And what happens in the next step is that you just check if so any that cell with exactly 3 living neighbors will come to life. Okay, so if something is empty, but among the 8 cells around it, if 3 from the 8 are active, the one in the middle becomes alive. Any living cell with 2 or 3 living neighbors remains alive. Okay, and if something has less than 2 or more or 3 neighbors, it dies. So very simple rules, right? Very simple rules, but you create something that was almost like not under your control, right? Because you create more complex things can get created with that, right? From these simple rules, you can create shapes that, for example, repeat each other, or very large complex shapes that repeat each other, or repeat themselves, let's say, in space, right? Like it activates another cell, the old one dies, and you, after a few iterations, get to a point where the initial shape is created again, just moved in space. It can get as crazy as creating the game of life out of the game of life. So this is just a GIF I found. I'm not 100% sure if you can really do that, if this is really viable, but if that is, that's just absolutely mind-blowing. And it just showcases my point, what I'm trying to say, that you have just very simple rules that create some very complex system. And that's exactly what's happening with Go. And Go is really, really special in this case, because like in the Conway's game of life is itself already quite fascinating, but the rules are relatively, right, like just what's a polite way how to say it, it's just made up, right? 2 or 3, and you're taking it from the 8 around you, like, and it's not a game, it's just an algorithm. Go is really special in this way, that it does have this aspect, plus it's really clean. There are no weird rules that are put in by some king that is pushing some kind of agenda, or some, I don't know, something was just popular in the culture in that century and that's why it bled into the game and blah blah blah. It has basically none of that. Plus it has this aspect of being extremely complex, with very simple rules, and the rules that it has seem to be like really not made up. Like you really just have it considers four of its neighbors, right? So the only things that come into this game feel like that you just have a circle and you have a square, and that's it. A square has 4 sides, and that somehow inspires these rules, and it really feels like out of this world almost. So this is basically what I was talking about right now. The absence of cultural ballast, complexity arising from simplicity, and how the game feels more discovered than created. Like Emanuel Lesker, which is one of the most, I think he's like the longest holding chess world champion, like one of the most influential chess champions in like, let's say, modern history. He was German, and in one conversation with some article, he had this quote. I put here even the original German one. And the exact translation to the question of do you think do you think chess is played somewhere else in the universe, like he said, if there are intelligent creatures anywhere in the universe, they could know chess, but most likely they know Go, which is such a mic drop to be said by a extremely influential chess champion. And this is a quote that's quite popular among Go players because it really encapsulates what many of us feel. And that's it. That's basically the crux of what I was trying to present about Go and how it differs, in which way it's similar and in which way it's different from chess or other games, right? And the rest is just some interesting points. So Go material. The most typical is wood, obviously, but you can use like a simple fake leather, which you can roll and easily travel with. Plywood is the next cheap version, and solid wood is the most respected one. You can have different thicknesses, right? You can have different materials. The most traditional way, the most sought after in these days, let's say, is the traditional Japanese kaya, which is a type of pine from Japan. The English version is nutmeg yew. How to translate it or how to read it? And again, it can have different thicknesses, but the one we saw in the picture, if I maybe can go back to it. Well, yeah, this one for example, right? This is like the most ideal one. Very traditional. The legs are even supposed to resemble lotus flowers. So yeah, very old, very traditional, and quite amazing, quite expensive. So can be 200 to 800 years old. This is the price. Interesting detail, the board, and even the cheaper ones, right? Unless you have a super cheap one, but any proper board is slightly longer than white. Longer in the sense like that the space between the two opponents is slightly longer than the width of the board. It's just to create a more square effect from the point of view from the player. It's the same effect that you get when stopping at a stop sign with your car, right? When you have something written on the road, it's usually very elongated, and the purpose is just to have it more easy to read from the driver's point of view. In that case, it's very extreme, right? The angle is very extreme. Here the angle is not that crazy, but by making it slightly longer, you create a slightly more comfortable way to look at it. I think that's a really interesting detail. It's also because you put small stones on it, right? Like there are no big 3D figures, so it's slightly more necessary to have this. Or even when you have like shogi, right? Shogi, it's also not a 3D big chess piece, but it's a small chess piece, and but even in that case, I think it's slightly elongated. I'm not a shogi expert, but I would almost claim that it's not that important with shogi. But in Go, where it's literally just small, like dots, let's say, right, like a piece, it's nice to have this there. This is just the shapes that the board gets cut out, that you can have different the different quality. I mean, let's just say that this is the traditional way how to do it, right? The traditional way, the ink is put in with a katana, which is so cool. You put it on with a katana, right? And the board, I mean, I think it's this thick part is the upper part. So again, this is the upper part, and I think it is quite understandable that if you put the middle of the trunk into the corner, you need a very thick trunk, right? If the middle of the trunk is in the middle of the board, you don't need such a big tree, right? It doesn't need to be that old. So the A and B are the most expensive ones, especially A. B is similar. D is surprisingly the cheapest one. I mean, I'm saying this surprisingly, but if we look at the result, so the reason why people prefer this one is that it has the it's the most expensive one because it requires the biggest piece of tree, plus the top part that you look at, it really has just the lines that connect you and the player, and they just go straight. It's very lovely. If you have the middle part of the tree in the middle of the board, you get this effect which looks like a stain. People don't like it, and this is the cheapest one, the D version, where the the outside part of the trunk is on the top of the board. But I think this looks lovely, right? To me, it looks amazing. I would be happy to have a board like this. Anyway, and this is was a very, very common way how to make boards in the past. I think especially in like Chinese depictions I saw this a lot, but I don't want to say that it's a Chinese style of making boards because I'm not sure. The fact that it's dark with light lines, that's totally not important. Like there were many dark boards. Even these days you can still get dark boards, but light boards with backlines are the most common. Stones. So the cheapest one is plastic. The next cheapest one is plastic with the metal core, because the metal core makes it more heavy and it becomes more the weight is more similar to a real stone. Pure plastic is just it's a little bit uncomfortable because it can stick to your finger slightly, but I mean, if you are just on the go and you need to travel with it a lot, just having fake leather piece that looks like a board with plastic stones, totally fine. I mean, this game is about skill, it's not about how thick your wood is. So but in for example, plastic with the metal core it's surprisingly common in tournaments. So in my country, in Czech Republic, this is they call it ING stones, but there are many versions of this. So it's a way how to have it cheap but also not as light like plastic. The next good one is glass. So if you buy something for yourself at home, glass is the best option. It feels very nice in the hand, and it's still cheap enough for like normal people. But if you play in like a high level tournament, right, for like a title, like serious tournaments, the traditional way in Japan is to use slate for the black stones and shell for the white stones, and the shells are the more expensive from these two. So when somebody decides for what level of, like, what price to pay for the stones, you basically go by how much you want to, what's the white stone quality. Right. So there are different shells that are used, and then there are different grain qualities. I'm gonna get to it later. In China, they use jade for the black and just cindered quartz for the white. Here it's the opposite. The blacks are a little bit more expensive and valued in this one. Another big difference between the Japanese and Chinese style is that the Japanese are biconvex. Biconvex means that they are curved on both sides, where the Chinese ones are flat on one side. One reason why I hear when people say why is it flat on one side, often you hear the answer because it makes a more loud clap when placing on the table. While that's true, I always thought that's such a stupid reason. Number one, why would you if you're a good player, you shouldn't need to place stones as loud as possible to impress your other player, right? Like, this sounds like such a stupid argument. Plus, there are obvious downsides, and there's another obvious reason why you would make it flat. So the obvious reason why you make it flat is that these ones can be when you look at the process, how it's made, it's like hot and liquid, and you just drip it on a piece of metal or something, and then you let it cool, or you can look it up, but I saw them poured just purely poured, and then it's flat on one side, right? That's one reason why you would just leave it in the original shape that it gets created with. So I think that's more. I think that's probably the number one reason why there are Go stones that are flat on one side, is just because they were dripped, or what's the right explanation, right? You just imagine some really thick substance, and it creates a stone like that, right? And black stones are slightly larger than white stones. Yeah, so just because when you look, it's like when they say that a girl in a black dress looks thinner than in a white one. It's the same thing, that your eye perceives the edge of a black object. The eye simply doesn't perceive the edge of a black object as distinct as a white one. It's obvious, right? So the same applies to black and white stones, and to compensate for that, it's common to make the black stones slightly larger. I think this applies even to glass stones. It doesn't apply to super cheap plastic stones. So this is an example of the typical Chinese Yunzi stones. I think the black ones are really amazing. I'm totally a fan of those, but personally, the downside of using flat stones is that if you play with them, if you take it into your hand and you need to place it on the board, so many things go on in your head that focusing also on the shape of every single stone you're taking in your hand, and thinking if you're putting it on the table in the right on the right side, I think that's just something you should not have to bother while playing a game that already takes up so much of your headspace. But when it lies on the table, it's more stable, sure, and the clap sound, okay, I get it. But just for the convenience of placing something, I think these ones this shape is much better. So these are clam stones. The most common size is around 9 millimeters. 8 millimeters is also quite common, but it usually doesn't get lower than that. So when you buy for yourself some glass stones, I would recommend 9 millimeters or around that. Maybe 8 if you for some reason can't get anything else. It's still playable, but in the hand, for me at least, around 9 it's a little bit more comfortable. And I guess you can play with larger ones as well, but once you get to sizes like these, it's I never saw it really used. Plus, they're extremely expensive when it's made really from this material, from if it's these shell stones. So the way they are used is usually as a gift when you want to give to somebody like a really expensive piece of Go equipment that they will maybe never use. It's something that you like inherit to somebody else, I guess, because it's honestly it's not comfortable to play with these, I imagine, and it's incredibly expensive probably also. So I mean, you can look up some sizes of these in the best way to get these types of stones and like expensive stones and expensive equipment that's handmade in Japan. What was the page? Kuro. Yeah, so this is the page that you need some money to be able to shop here, but just to look how these things get created, and they're really detailed in how where do they have like supply stones. So this is not very common, right? This is just like some, but I'm sure they I remember them even showing videos how they make it. Yeah, I think I took some pictures from here. So extremely, yeah, you can see the prices here. Size 50, 5 million. Yeah, it's like yeah, well, you can translate it yourself. Yeah, so I'm spending too much time on this. Another view where it oh, I didn't switch back. Click. Yeah, another view of how the shell stones are see-through, right? Because the lines are literally from the, it's literally a shell, so the lines are see-through. This is the difference of the quality. So the three quality levels are Yuki, Tsuki, and Hana. Snow, like the most expensive one is Snow, the middle one is Moon, and the cheapest one is Flower. So this on the left is the Snow quality, and this is the Flower quality. It's just a name, right? To instead of saying ABC, they have we're talking about old traditions here. The difference is the thickness and consistency of the lines. So here the lines are very thin and close together and consistent, right? Here the lines are differently spaced, thicker, so it's cheaper. And last thing, the rating. So the modern rating is similar to chess rating, right? So ELO, but the traditional way how you rate was, and it's again very natural, right? So if you had two players, and if one player is a certain amount better than the other one, you can give the weaker player some amount of handicaps. And the way you give handicaps is that you just give him some extra stones in the beginning of the game. So giving a 1 stone extra is basically just starting the game, right? So the 1 stone extra is not really called a handicap, but 2 stones extra, that's already considered a 2 stone handicap. If somebody, and if two players are evenly matched with the 2 stone handicap, you would call that a 2 grade difference. So that's how the grades were like counted in the past. You literally, it's literally just by the amount of stones that somebody else is better than the other one to make them roughly similar to each other. And it's really surprising, it's really interesting how well it scales. So and those were the cues. So if you remember that, how do you take a stone from the board? if it loses all 4 of its liberties, or all of its liberties if it's connected to other stones of the same color, right? So if a stone loses all of its liberties, and you understand that, specifically if it's like one stone, you're considered 30Q. That's it, you're all 30Qs now if you understand this. And every stone that you're better than somebody else, it's like 1Q less, and it goes down all the way to 1Q. And then it goes from, so what's better than 1Q is 1 dan, and then second dan is better than first dan, so it goes from first dan all the way to 9 dan. And the only thing that's better than 9 dan, I mean, here it already gets like the traditional counting is just 30Q to 9 dan. That's the traditional counting. But you have also pro players, and they have their own counting system, let's say, and it goes from 1 pro dan to 9 pro dan. In the modern days, this needed to be somehow matched to ELO, because when you play on tournaments, you get points, and those points get translated to Qs. So when you go to a tournament, you start as a, well, it depends on the tournament, but in Europe, and I think it's probably the same in America as well. You start with 100 points, which is 20Q. And if you get to 200 points, or actually I think it's 150, they changed it slightly, but let's say the basic idea is that 100 is 20Q, and then 200 would be 19Q, 500 would be 16Q, and so on, all the way to 2000 points where you're 1Q. And then dans. And here professional dans have also rating systems, but as I said, it's a little bit, it depends how you get awarded this professional dan. Like, these are already so high levels that this is not something that really concerns you as a normal player, right? As a normal player, if you play, let's say if you get to like a single digit Q within, like, let's say 2 years, you're a pretty good player. And that means you need to play regularly and stuff. But to just love the game, you can be whatever level you are. The love for the game really doesn't shouldn't, like, it's not like the game. You don't love the game for the specific skill that you learn to use, right? You love the game for how it feels, for the reasons I described before. So I have respect even for totally new players that are just passionate and want to learn. It's totally great. But so different people learn in a different speed. That's totally fine. AI. Let me just quickly mention what happened in 2016. A computer bet the strongest Go player at the time, which was Lee Sedol. He retired by now. Back then it was a 5 rounds game. He was very gracious in it. He even won one game. I think it was game number 3 or 2. And it was definitely a huge shift in the perception of AI. Up until then, most people thought it's impossible for a computer to beat humans. Nowadays, people pretend that, obviously, right? AI made such big leaps in the recent years that it feels obvious. But 2015, it was really not obvious. And people said that either it's gonna take another 50, 100 or years, or it would never happen. I remember myself personally saying that a computer will never be able to beat a human, probably. But if it happens one day, we would be super close from having like general intelligence where a computer can totally substitute a human or like supersede, right? In everything, in every way. Where I like, okay, we're getting to like pub conversation level, but it's really interesting. I back then I started really thinking a lot about the deeper implications of that, and nobody, like most people outside of Go, didn't pay attention to AI at all, and only now people start realizing how powerful it is when it can paint pictures, where in 2016 it already had this feat where it was not, it's impossible to brute force this game, and it turned out impossible to just use some clever algorithms. They used Monte Carlo and other things to get the game like a newcomer level, like the strongest algorithms that were around in the, like 2014 were like don't take me by word, but those were algorithms that were largely as good as somebody learning the game for a few months. And then suddenly, within a very short time, there were these neural networks were slowly coming in, and then suddenly Google challenged Huawei, like a Chinese player living in Europe, and bet him 5-0, and that was already a huge moment. That was something that people thought would be impossible, and within a few months they challenged Lee Sedol, and this happened. He still won one game, but just the fact that this was like possible in the world, it was a totally really earth-shaking. Many players stopped playing at that time because there was some type of romanticism that the game suddenly lost. But I'm happy that the game is still going along just fine. It's a human game for humans, and humans can still have fun with this game together and getting connected throughout cultures and time, right? We're still playing this game that's like thousands of years old in the same way as back then, basically, and it's something still incredibly romantic, even though humans are not the strongest players anymore. And yeah, I talked about the rules, and this is basically it. So thank you for your attention, and bye bye.